pushed the Middle East closer to the kind of blow-up every diplomat and military planner dreads. Missiles and drones struck into the United Arab Emirates. Fires broke out at civilian sites. An oil facility was hit. Commercial shipping in the Gulf is jittery. Regional capitals are consulting their war plans. And Washington, Abu Dhabi and Jerusalem are weighing how much force and how soon to use. What changed overnight was not a single dramatic, unambiguous act, but a cascade of moves and counter-moves that together sharpen the choices for every side. Iranian-launched cruise missiles and unmanned systems reportedly struck Emirati territory and maritime spaces. American commanders in the region say Iranian missiles and drones targeted U.S. ships operating near the Strait of Hormuz, and that U.S. naval forces defended themselves against small boat harassment and attempted strikes. The result, direct hits in the Gulf, diplomatic outrage in Abu Dhabi, and a public warning from Washington that it will defend ships, allies, and the freedom of navigation that keeps global commerce moving. The tone from Tehran has been mixed. On one level, parts of the Iranian security establishment are asserting control over the Strait of Hormuz and broadcasting the idea that Iran can choke or unnerve maritime traffic if it chooses. On another level, fissures are visible at the top of Iran's own system. Signals that not everyone in Tehran agrees on the price of escalation. Reports that elements of the country's paramilitary apparatus carried out operations without full government approval, if accurate, are among the most consequential developments of all. When armed forces begin to act with operational autonomy, the predictability of statecraft collapses across the region. The practical implications are immediate. Ports, pipelines, and oil storage facilities sit within range. Insurance costs for shippers have spiked. Governments are rerouting or prepare in alternative corridors to move cargo if the strait is closed or becomes too dangerous. The simple fact is the Strait of Hormuz is no longer only a geographic choke point. It is a political pressure point, and every strike that stokes fear there risks a chain reaction. Washington's posture has hardened visibly. U.S. Central Command, under its current commander, has publicly described hostile Iranian actions against commercial and military vessels in recent days and said U.S. forces have taken defensive measures to protect ships and personnel. That posture includes escorting commercial vessels and maintaining the readiness to strike targets that threaten U.S. assets. The American calculus is twofold: protect freedom of navigation now and deter further Iranian attacks that could cascade into a wider war. Jerusalem is also watching with acute concern. Israel's armed forces are at heightened alert. Air defenses have been placed on full readiness, and planners are considering a raft of contingencies that include rapid aerial strikes, defensive interceptions, and countermeasures against asymmetric threats from Iran's regional networks. The Israeli assessment is sober. Even if an immediate full-scale conventional exchange does not occur, Iran's proxies and low-cost weapons, missiles, drones, fast boats, and covert cells can inflict damage and sustain pressure across several theaters at once. That is the heart of the strategic dilemma. Iran's strength, in many respects, is not built on a symmetric military that can be defeated in a single campaign. It is built on layers: missiles, maritime disruption, proxy networks, and the ability to threaten economic and symbolic targets across the region. The likely Western and regional responses focus strikes on infrastructure and command nodes, protection of shipping lanes, and punitive economic measures may be dramatic and painful for Tehran, but they're unlikely to remove every lever Iran can use to cause true. Force can wound. It may not end the threat. Yet, there is another danger that has been brought into public view: the risk that Iran's own internal divisions will determine the pace and scale of external conflict. Opposition-linked reporting and accounts circulating in regional media describe a sharp public disagreement between Iran's elected president and senior military figures over recent attacks. Those reports quote the president describing the strikes as madness and complete irresponsibility, and demanding urgent meetings of Iran's highest authorities to stop a slide into wider conflict. At the same time, a spokesperson linked to the paramilitary leadership is reported to have warned the Emiratis in stark terms. If the Emiratis make mistakes, it will learn a lesson that it will never forget. If true, those two sentences capture the dilemma. One side condemns the action as reckless, the other elevates it into a strategic threat. When the people who order missiles and the people who run diplomacy are not on the same page, accidental escalation becomes more likely than carefully calibrated deterrence. The nuclear dimension makes this more urgent. International agencies have reported that Tehran still holds enriched material at advanced concentrations, and Western intelligence assessments publicly estimate that absent a removal of key materials or effective international verification, Iran could reach a weapons-capable threshold within a timeline measured in months to a year. That math is what keeps strategists awake. Removing a single facility or destroying centrifuges on paper does not erase the enriched fuel or the knowledge that produced it. If material remains in hand, a pause in hostilities can give a country time to rebuild, reconstitute and hide capabilities, and that is precisely the worry voiced by those who oppose deals that would restore economic relief without ironclad guarantees on nuclear materials. At sea, the operational picture. The U has darkened. The United States has demonstrated the capacity to escort commercial vessels, and its ships have engaged to protect themselves and others. The regional navies, including Gulf partners, have fired interceptors and tried to shield coastal infrastructure. But Iran's arsenal of asymmetric tools, cruise missiles, anti-ship missiles, swarm boats, mines and drones complicate maritime defense. An attack on a well-trafficked oil terminal or a tanker laden with crude has outsized consequences for global markets and domestic politics in energy-dependent states. That is why Washington and its partners are conducting both patrols and planning exercises to raise the cost of aggression and prevent an attacker from seeing a clear path to a strategic payoff. This is also a moment of diplomatic signaling. The United States has told allies and partners that burden sharing and political support are expected. At the same time, high-level statements from Tehran and its proxies make clear that the conflict is not limited to battles at sea. Proxy fronts from the Red Sea to Yemen, from Lebanon to the Eastern Mediterranean, are all part of the theatre. Iran can, and often does, leverage allied militias and political networks to strike where direct state-to-state war would be politically costly. Those proxies matter because they give Iran plausible deniability while still imposing pain. They also give regional actors asymmetric leverage. The ability to raise the cost of intervention without facing a conventional reply. The cycle is brutal. A state-backed militia fires a rocket or a drone. A state responds with targeted strikes. The militia escalates elsewhere. Leaders who believe they can hold the lines of conflict risk discovering that escalation migrates to multiple unconnected locales at a speed no single capital can control. On the ground, humanitarian and emergency organizations are quietly doing the work that keeps people alive. Paramedics and ambulance staff. Fighters are treating the wounded and preparing for surges. Volunteers and medical teams rotate supplies and refit vehicles, knowing that the next round of strikes could come at any hour. That preparedness, while unsung, is vital, and it highlights a simple fact of war. Civilian harm drives political responses and shapes public opinion in ways that can either temper or inflame state behavior. So where does this leave decision makers? There are no easy choices. One path is sustained pressure. Escort ships hold Iran economically and militarily at risk and try to starve the regime of the resources and confidence to wage costly campaigns. The other path is calibrated strikes aimed at degrading Tehran's capabilities to a degree that persuades it to negotiate from weakness. Both carry costs. Pressure can entrench hardliners and radicalize populations. Strikes can spark wider war. And negotiation, if it yields economic relief without ironclad verification of nuclear materials, may be seen as handing Iran a reprieve that it can use to rebuild. For regional partners, the immediate imperative is damage limitation. Shore up air defenses, harden critical infrastructure, ensure that commercial vessels can transit if safe, and prepare for the humanitarian consequences of escalation. For the United States and other outside powers, the imperative is to preserve options while avoiding the miscalculation that turns a limited confrontation into a multi-front war. And for the people living under the shadow of conflict, the calculus is tragically simpler and crueler. Lives disrupted, livelihoods imperiled, and daily routines postponed by sirens and alerts. That human cost is a potent, if often overlooked, strategic variable. A single strike on a port, a refinery, a residential building, or a hospital can ripple through markets, politics, and public morale in ways that are disproportionate to the physical damage or could stop the slide. De-escalatory steps must be credible and verifiable. They require buttons both sides can press without losing face, meaningful, independent inspection of nuclear materials, a phased reduction of hostile maritime maneuvers, and limited confidence-building measures that reduce the risk of accidental strikes. But crucially, any diplomatic approach must reckon with the shadow of domestic politics inside Iran. If key armed elements act independently or believe that force secures their standing, no agreement signed by ministers will be sufficient. So as capitals deliberate, three immediate facts are worth bearing in mind. First, the Strait of Hormuz has become a strategic fulcrum. Control or denial of that passage changes the leverage available to every actor. Second, the architecture of Iran's power is not monolithic. Internal disagreements between elected officials and military leaders increase the likelihood of unexpected moves. Third, the nuclear question remains central until enriched materials are accounted for and safeguarded. The risk that a conflict sparks a rush to break out remains intolerable to many in the West, to regional neighbors alike. We are living through a period in which a single miscalculated strike could force choices that are irreversible. Commanders and ministers know this. That is why the language from capitals is at once stern and cautious. Words like deterrence, escalation control, and proportionality are being used for a reason: to try to contain risks while preserving options. At the same time, the public face of the crisis is raw and human. Emergency services are pleading for support. Families in port cities are cleaning up shattered glass and tending minor burns. Traders and insurers are recalculating routes. That everyday resilience is as consequential as any missile battery. It keeps societies functioning amid shocks, and it shapes the political space for leaders to act. In the coming days, the world will watch whether the pattern of limited strikes and counter-strikes dens into a wider confrontation, or whether cooler heads, aided by visible and forcible verification on nuclear materials and clear rules of the road at sea, can defuse the crisis before the next round of fire. The decisions ahead are not only military, they're also political and moral. They will determine whether this period becomes a contained episode of brinkmanship or a broader war with costs that reverberate far beyond the Gulf. As this story unfolds, remember what is at stake beyond the headlines. The lives of civilians in cities under threat, the security of seafarers navigating contested waters, the stability of global energy markets, and the fragile web of alliances that keeps open the channels of diplomacy. In this narrow window, every action will be judged not only by its immediate effect, but by whether it increases or reduces the chance that the region can step back from the edge. One voice urged viewers simply to pray, saying, "God listens, whatever the beliefs of T." Those who hear that plea, it captures an elemental truth of war. When institutions fray and conflict looms, ordinary people turn to faith, to neighbors, and to relief organizations to make sense of a world that feels increasingly unpredictable. The final question is a simple one. Will state actors choose to restrain, to strike, or to negotiate? In practical terms, will the next moves be made in diplomatic halls or on naval decks, in emergency rooms, or inside command centers? The answer will shape not only the immediate arc of this confrontation, but the strategic map of the Middle East for years to come. Until then, navies will escort convoys, air defenses will stand ready, diplomats will shuttle between capitals, and emergency services will keep doing the work that saves lives. The risk is high, the margin for error is small.